Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. This is going to be a recent reads video. For every 3 or sometimes 4 books that I complete, I do a minor wrap up, just registering the fact that I completed those books. I don't do a review per se of each of the books, but I do talk about them. Sometimes I'll read a little passage. I'm on the fence as to whether I want to read a passage from one of them this time. So I've finished 3 books since the last recent reads video, and almost surprisingly I have done so. I should mention as well that there is a playlist, and if you go to the playlist Recent Reads, you will be able to get a record of everything that I have read since I have been on BookTube making BookTube videos. I don't imagine it could be of much use to anybody. Sometimes booktubers say they want to keep a record for themselves, but I don't think most of us actually go back and watch our own videos. I have a little book which I didn't bring in here, in which I record everything. I jot down the title, when I started, when I finished the book. This time I forgot to enter a number of things when I started, so the book is a bit jumbled, but be that as it may, life does not always flow smoothly, and if that's the worst of our problems, what have we to fear? So I think the first book of the most recent ones that I finished was Mark Edward Lewis's book about the Tang Dynasty, China's cosmopolitan empire. And this is the third in a series of books which he wrote, third in the Harvard Imperial China series. And so it carried me along through the Tang Dynasty. I now have pretty secure footing about the basic history of China from the beginning through to the Tang Dynasty. So I've spoken elsewhere about his books. I find them all to be superb. In one of the 3, possibly the second, I found a sentence that had some kind of almost like a grammatical error, something of a grammatical awkwardness that seemed to suggest something had been revised and then not proofread super well when it finally got printed. But other than that, I've really found no gripes in the books by Mark Edward Lewis. I've talked about him, as I say, elsewhere. The most recent big book that I've finished has been Henry Adams and the Making of America by Garry Wills, and I've talked about that a fair amount recently as well. So it was something I picked up after having read The History of the United States by Henry Adams. That was my big history project for the year, and I enjoyed his writing. Garry Wills doesn't bring an awful lot to Henry Adams beyond a retelling of what Adams included in the history, largely a paraphrase, but occasionally he intersperses some update where more recent information obtains. And he, for example, in one instance, delves into a lurid sex scandal that occurred to one of the major players in the history. And I actually just did a video on that recently. If I think of it, I will link to my video about Lewis, the Chinese historian, and I will put a link to the video where I touch on that, although it's a sprawling video that goes into many other topics. But it was nice to revisit the history where I found that I was not secure on the history. I didn't understand what Adams was saying thoroughly the first go round. In those situations, Wills helped me quite a bit. Where it was plainly evident the first time around, then I found the paraphrasing tedious and obvious and tiresome. So I do not especially recommend this book. I would recommend the history by Henry Adams before this. It's a much larger work, but this is like reading a fluffed out book report. And then the third book, I'm not even really sure why I picked it up, but it follows nicely on the heels of that. The history of Adams deals with the administrations of President Jefferson and President Madison. And for some reason, this book has been on my shelf for a long time. I have no idea when I picked it up. And it's very thin. It's 88 pages. And nothing has ever really called to me to make me dive into it, even though it turned out to be something of an easy read. But it's a series of newspaper articles, 4 of them to be specific. And this work was published, I think, 4 years after the death of Thomas Jefferson, something like that. I can't tell you exactly what the year is. I think he died during the administration of John Quincy Adams. And I thought, just because why not, I thought I would give you a little history of my experience with Jefferson. This is my edition of Thomas Jefferson. It's a modern library edition. And I am not really sure when or where I picked it up, save to say that it was a long time ago. I carried this book to Taiwan in my youth. I read Abraham Lincoln, and of course I became enamored with the writing style of Abraham Lincoln, and very much so with the man himself. I did not have a similar reaction with Thomas Jefferson, though I recall sitting at the desk inside my little room. It wasn't an apartment. We rented out little rooms. And so I recall sitting in there reading the book, and I can't say exactly what I read of the book. Here is a nice $2 bill, which I have kept in there. Probably some of my viewers have never seen one of these. It is legal tender. And there is another bit of paraphernalia that I keep in there, which I suppose is worth showing, which is just a little article from Newsweek, I think. April 3rd, 1995, Newsweek, When Thomas Met Sally. The truth is buried with master and slave. Central to Jefferson in Paris, the new Merchant Ivory film, is a nearly 200-year-old story that has never ceased to spark controversy. Thomas Jefferson's supposed sexual liaison with Sally Hemings, a slave woman from his plantation. Despite the certainty with which the filmmakers portray the affair, it is a story for which there has never been, and probably never can be, anything approaching proof. So in 1995, I am sure that I took that as the gospel truth about Thomas Jefferson. Sometimes irrefutable certainties do wind up getting refuted. But I did like aspects of Jefferson. I liked the fact that he felt that one of the great scourges upon the country had been the introduction of slavery. despite the fact that he himself profited and lived a luxuriant lifestyle based upon the peculiar institution. It was at least nice that he said as much. And there were letters, I think, to a nephew lining out a course of study. 11 hours of the day should be broken into, there should be math, there should be science, there should be this, there should be that. And then, of course, take time for a good hour or two walk, that kind of thing. And at the time, I was interested in ideas of self-improvement like that, but I never had that kind of discipline, to be sure. So I'm not really sure how much of this I read. There were letters between him and John Adams, and those were the letters that I liked the most. I don't know if I read all of the letters or just some of the letters. I really don't know if I read the what is it, the Virginia Constitution, was it? So it's got the autobiography, the Annas, whatever that is, travel journeys, essay on Anglo-Saxon, biographical sketches, notes on Virginia. I may well have read that, and then a ton of letters. So anyhow, that's neither here nor there. But it, and I should say, this modern, one time in the neighborhood box, I found this exact volume, except more recent, when Modern Library stopped having this kind of cover, and it was just a blank thing with the title on it. But it was a much better shape than this. And I picked it up, and I thought about it, and I thought, well, maybe I'll keep the inside of the book since it's better than this, and switch the cover. In the end, I just decided to keep my original edition because it did indeed travel with me across the sea. And I have the good memories of reading it or attempting to read it. But having just studied the history of the Jefferson administration and realizing that he was, I'm not going to say he was incompetent in the way that James Madison was, but his administration ended sort of with the overthrow of all of his better ideals and ended in a fiasco on multiple fronts. He was just glad to squeak out of there with a reputation not completely in shreds. Of course, I wonder how he would look to his reputation today, now that the major thought we have about him pertains to his relationship with Sally Hemings. That is neither here nor there. When I was a young man, I was very naive, and as clipping that article shows, I wanted that affirmation that Thomas Jefferson had not slept with that woman. It turns out, though, it did not depend on what the meaning of is, and with a greater understanding of human nature, I see no reason to hold Thomas Jefferson, the man, up to an idealized caricature, if you will. But it was nice to come across this. A lot of the first, I think, essay responds explicitly to Thomas Jefferson's denigrations of the Negro race. He talks about all of their faults, and David Walker refutes them pretty soundly, I think. It's a really good corrective, while those of us in the white community were walking around with our half-baked ideas of how how slavery had been beneficial to the black man and how it really was more of an inconvenience to the white slave owners and uh, white white folks of the South were educating the black folks in the ways of civility, but God knows not in literacy, as David Walker points out very precisely, and not even in religion. While we were walking around with these half-baked ideas, all along, who knew there were people who knew better than we did? So it is, and thank goodness we have their records. Now, I'm not going to call this a literary masterpiece. You get the sense of the Bible flowing through the English prose of David Walker. And I know after I had first come into contact with the Bible and was taking stabs at writing, I remember writing things that sort of channeled some of the tone that I had picked up from the Bible. So it's a natural course that language takes and that language has taken in the Western tradition. That said, I thought, even though it's rather extended, I will read you something of this. As I say, it's only 88 pages. I never had any reason to pick it up, but I'm very glad that I did now, just upon the heels of reading the history of Jefferson's administration. As I say, it's a nice corrective. I have a bit of a shadow here, it seems, so it might make my reading of this kind of hard. Now, at the time, I think this is 1820 something. Let's see if it says. If any single event may be said to have triggered the Negro Revolt, it is the publication of David Walker's appeal to the colored citizens of the world in September 1829. The slaveholding South saw in it only incitement to servile rebellion and went to fantastic lengths to suppress it. Even in the North, where slavery was generally opposed in principle, moderates insisted that the time for abolition had not yet come and agreed that the pamphlet was inappropriate and incendiary. I didn't read the introduction. I just plowed into the thing itself. So when I get done with this video, I will look at that. You don't need it, but a little historical context doesn't hurt, I suppose. If you don't mind, this text, by the way, is easily obtainable online. I don't know if Project Gutenberg has it, but archive.org certainly does, and you can find it all over the place. That's just how important it is. The movement for colonizing free Negroes, particularly, back to Africa was very strong. Even in Lincoln's day, there were remnants of it. Well, this is Lincoln's day. What did I say? 1829. So Lincoln would be 20 at this time. So the back to Africa colonization movement was very much in force. And then when Lincoln got into office, he flirted with it a little bit because I believe his postmaster, who belonged to a very powerful family, really pushed him or pressed him in that direction. I think he at some point realized it was not a workable solution. David Walker's appeal propounds that obvious solution to the theory of colonization. And more than that, though, it expresses the less than the impracticalities of it. It addresses the moral reasons why it is a repugnant idea. I'm not sure if he touches on that in this little bit. It's a very long paragraph. Yeah, just one, but a very long paragraph. So I will read this. Incidentally, there is a footnote here. When I say the state of Ohio, there's a footnote here about the great slaveholder, Mr. John Randolph, and he is the subject of the anecdote, the lurid sex controversy, which I spoke of earlier. I say lurid, but it's just an example of the sort of occurrence which was common enough in the slave-holding South, and we think it lurid because the reportage of such a thing was never common. And even Henry Adams in his history, while he knew the details of the scandal, yet in a gentlemanly fashion chose not to report them, although we might say it is for other reasons than being gentlemanly as well. We of the whiter persuasion don't like hearing about ourselves. So let me go into the long paragraph. This is very near the end. Do the colonizationists think to send us off without first being reconciled to us? Do they think to bundle us up like brutes and send us off as they did our brethren of the state of Ohio? Have they not to be reconciled to us, or reconcile us to them, for the cruelties with which they have afflicted our fathers and us? Methinks colonizationists think they have a set of brutes to deal with, sure enough. Do they think to drive us from our country and homes after having enriched it with our blood and tears, and keep back millions of our dear brethren sunk in the most barbarous wretchedness to dig up gold and silver for them and their children? Surely the Americans must think that we are brutes, as some of them have represented us to be. They think that we do not feel for our brethren, whom they are murdering by the inches, but they are dreadfully deceived. I acknowledge that there are some deceitful and hypocritical wretches among us who will tell us one thing while they mean another, and thus they go on aiding our enemies to oppress themselves and us. But I declare this day before my Lord and Master that I believe there are some true-hearted sons of Africa in this land of oppression, but pretended liberty, who do in reality feel for their suffering brethren who are held in bondage by tyrants. Some of the advocates of this cunningly devised plot of Satan represent us to be the greatest set of cutthroats in the world, as though God wants us to take his work out of his hand before he is ready. Does not vengeance belong to the Lord? Is he not able to repay the Americans for their cruelties, with which They have afflicted Africa's sons and daughters without our interference unless we are ordered. It is surprising to think that the Americans, having the Bible in their hands, do not believe it. Are not the hearts of all men in the hands of the God of battles? And does he not suffer some, in consequence of cruelties, to go on until they are irrecoverably lost? Now, what can be more aggravating than for the Americans, after having treated us so bad, to hold us up to the world as such great throat cutters? It appears to me as though they are resolved to assail us with every species of affliction that their ingenuity can invent. See the African Repository and Colonial Journal from its commencement to the present day. See how we are, through the medium of that periodical, abused and held up by the Americans as the greatest nuisance to society and throat cutters in the world. But the Lord sees their actions. Americans, notwithstanding you have and do continue to treat us more cruel than any heathen nation ever did a people it had subjected to the same condition that you have us. Now let us reason, I mean you of the United States, whom I believe God designs to save from destruction, if you will hear. For I declare to you, whether you believe it or not, that there are some on the continent of America who will never be able to repent. God will surely destroy them to show you his disapprobation of the murders they and you have inflicted on us. I say, let us reason. Had you not better take our body while you have it in your power, and while we are yet ignorant and wretched, not knowing but a little? Give us education and teach us the pure religion of our Lord and Master, which is calculated to make the lion lay down in peace with the lamb, and which millions of you have beaten us nearly to death for trying to obtain since we have been among you, and thus at once gain our affection while we are ignorant. Remember, Americans, that we must and shall be free and enlightened as you are. Will you wait until we shall, under God, obtain our liberty by the crushing arm of power? Will it not be dreadful for you? I speak, Americans, for your good. We must and shall be free, I say, in spite of you. You may do your best to keep us in wretchedness and misery, to enrich you and your children, but God will deliver us from under you. And woe will be to you if we have to obtain our freedom by fighting. Throw away your fears and prejudices then, and enlighten us and treat us like men, and we will like you more than we do now hate you. And tell us now no more about colonization, for America is as much our country as it is yours. Treat us like men, and there is no danger, but we will all live in peace and happiness together. For we are not like you, hard-hearted, unmerciful, and unforgiving. What a happy country this will be if the whites will listen. What nation under heaven will be able to do anything with us unless God gives us up into its hand? But Americans, I declare to you, while you keep us and our children in bondage and treat us like brutes to make us support you and your families, we cannot be your friends. You do not look for it, do you? Treat us then like men, and we will be your friends, And there is not a doubt in my mind, but the whole of the past will be sunk into oblivion, and we yet, under God, will become a united and happy people. The whites may say it is impossible, but remember that nothing is impossible with God. The Americans may say or do as they please, but they have to raise us from the condition of brutes to that of respectable men, and to make a national acknowledgement to us for the wrongs they have inflicted on us. As unexpected, strange, and wild as these propositions may to some appear, it is no less a fact that unless they are complied with, the Americans of the United States, though they may for a little while escape, God will yet weigh them in a balance, and if they are not superior to other men, as they have represented themselves to be, he will give them wretchedness to their very heart's content. So that was 2 paragraphs. There was a shorter paragraph attached on to the end of that. And I apologize that my reading was not as smooth as it might have been. I am not a professional at this, so I just did my best. That gives you a good idea of the general tone of the piece. He repeats himself a lot. A trope that comes about in one spot will be developed or repeated with some slightly different nuance in a subsequent part. But that gives you a good idea of this brief 88-page book, which I highly recommend to any American citizen who wants to know about his country's past. It is certainly more worth reading than Thomas Jefferson's denigrations of the African race as they found themselves in the United States of America. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.